fit. In my day, it meant a seizure. He had a fit. He got upset. He really got upset about something.
Yeah, no, that's not
No, you're fit for the job? You're able to do it? No.
Not exactly.
All right.
You got pretty close. Fit's like your outfit. Like what outfit. You're wearing right now, that's your fit.
Ah, okay. Finna. Finna. Is that an Irish person's name?
That is not an Irish person's name. That's actually a slang word for gonna. But a lot of like rappers today say that instead of gonna, because I guess
gonna?
Yeah, I'm gonna do something.
Oh, I'm gonna.
I'm going to whatever.
Okay, I'm gonna. Okay.
Yeah.
Finna.
Yeah.
All right.
Because it's a cool word of saying. Yeah, you got that.
And do you talk this way often?
Well, a lot of kids do.
I'm surprised I'm able to talk to my grandchildren.
As a parent, I am always looking for ways to manipulate my children into staying quiet, especially on long car rides or trips. Quick raise of hands, how many of you have ever been in a car with kids that just cannot get along? They are super loud, asking you questions, and you've thought to yourself, Lord, take me now. Quick raise of hands if you've been there before. Yes. So I'm going to be honest with you, okay? I'm going to be honest with you. Some of our parenting approaches may not be the best when it comes to getting kids to be quiet in the car, but Stacy and I do what is necessary to accomplish the task. And one of the things that we have discovered and we have found out is that if we find a really good podcast that opens the imagination of our kids, especially on long road trips, that they'll lean in and listen to the podcast and they'll remain quiet for a season of time. And if we can just get 30 minutes of silence, it is worth it. So we are constantly on the prowl looking for podcasts our kids can listen to that will keep them quiet, and we have come across an amazing one that we have to listen to ahead of time because not every episode is okay for our kids to listen to. But if it's parent approved, we will play it for them. A podcast called Against the Odds. Now, Against the Odds tells the stories in really creative ways of real life people that have experienced really hard situations and overcome them. Stories like a Thai soccer team of young adults who are caught in a cave and the daring rescue to save them after the cave has been flooded. Or stories like a group of students that went on a field trip and went on a hiking trip up Mount Hood and get caught in a blizzard and are freezing and on the brink of death. Or of a story of a woman in Alaska who is stuck there for the winter with nothing to eat, and she's got to figure out a way to live. These are the stories that keep my kids locked in and quiet in the car. And you might be saying, wow, Collin, that's a pretty intense thing to get your kids to allow them to listen to. I'm sure that they have a high level of anxiety when it comes to the world and what might happen if you go on a hike or if you go spend time in a cave or if you go on a trip. And the answer would be yes. I'm sure that my kids might be a little bit more anxious than they need to be because of the stories that they've heard, but that is the price you pay for a quiet car, and I will invest in their therapy later. That's where I'm at. Against the odds. Against the odds. There is something about us, isn't there, that loves a good comeback story, that loves it when someone beats the odds, that loves it when somebody who no one expects to win wins against the odds. I've been asking the question over the course of this series, what are the odds that kids these days grow up to become adults that flourish one day? What are the odds that they have great relationships and connections? What are the odds that they love God? And what are the odds that they experience the life that God has designed for them? And let me tell you, the odds are not great. Research shows us that 1 out of every 3 kids right now struggle with anxiety, probably because they listen to podcasts like Against the Odds. 1 out of 5 kids are experiencing depression, and 4 out of 5 kids, when polled, are fearful of their future and do not believe that adulthood will have anything good for them. And that's the world that our kids are growing up in right now. And the question that we've been asking in this series, Kids These Days, is what does it look like for us to help our kids beat the odds? Like, what if there is a way for us to live in a certain way or have a kind of game plan that allows them to win even when it doesn't look like they might be able to? How do we help our kids beat the odds? And if you're a parent, this matters. If you're a grandparent, this matters. If you're an uncle or an aunt, this matters because we love the next generation. If you are a part of the next generation, if you're a young adult, this matters. Because if there's a way that we could almost guarantee that you're going to beat the odds and have a great relationship with God, have a great relationship with people you care about, live a life of flourishing as an adult, wouldn't you want to have access to that game plan so that we could go win the game? The answer would be yes, we all want that. And so what I want to do for the next 2 weeks is I want to talk to us about that game plan. How is it that we, those of us that are entrusted with the responsibility of taking care of the next generation, how can we put together the kind of game plan that leads to the likelihood that our kids beat the odds of anxiety, beat the odds of depression, beat the odds of loneliness, beat the odds of walking away from faith, and invite them into a life of flourishing? I know that's what we all want. And the reality is that that journey is going to take us more than one Sunday. So I want to encourage you to make a commitment to be here, not only this weekend, good job, but next weekend as well, because we're going to unpack this playbook in a way that's incredibly practical and helpful to you. But I actually want to start today by giving you some information that if you just hold on, you'll see is really, really important. So real quick, question. How many of us are excited that football season is here? Is anybody excited about that? I am. Okay. Real quick. I still don't have an NFL team. So any Bucks fans out there? Are there any Bucks fans out there? Okay, great. None of you are willing to claim it. All right, cool. Any Giants fans? Any Giants fans out there? Yeah, it's always a New Yorker that wants to make some noise, right? Okay, that's good. Any Patriots fans out there? Any Patriots fans out there? Okay, yeah, a couple, right? A couple. What I find so interesting about the Patriots is that if you are a Patriots fan, after I share this illustration, you may want to find another church, all right? Because here's what was true about the Patriots. From about 2000 to 2007, the New England Patriots, they seemed unstoppable. Like nobody could beat this football team. They seemed to have an answer for every single thing their opponent would throw at them. Well, come to find out that part of the reason why that was the case was that the New England Patriots from 2000 to 2007 had been involved in stealing the plays of their opponents. And they knew what their opponents were going to do before the game even started. New England coaches were told to go into the locker rooms of the opposing team and to steal the script. So they knew what the first 20 plays that were going to be called by the other team. And they happened to win 2 Super Bowl championships back-to-back in that era. There was a ton of research done, and the conclusion was that the Patriots, they cheated. But if you ever talk to a Patriots fan, they say that they didn't cheat, which makes me say you should never trust a Patriots fan. It's a lot easier to beat the odds, isn't it? If you know what your opponent is going to do. It's a lot easier to increase the likelihood that you're going to win if you know the play that somebody's going to run before they run it. And that's got me thinking, what if there was a way for us to get access to the playbook that's being run to undermine faith in our kids? What if we knew what the game plan was by our opponent? Could it help us build a better game plan so that we could win and beat the odds? And what I would say to you is yes. So here's what I want to do today. Today, I want to give you the game plan that the enemy is running. The game plan that the enemy is running to undermine faith in the next generation. And if we can identify what that game plan is, next week, we'll talk about how to put together a game plan that leads to a higher likelihood of our kids winning. If you're up for that, say, I'm up for that. 1, 2, 3. All right. So if you have your Bibles, go to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1 is where we're going to be today. Because what we're going to find in the story of Daniel is that there is a role and a game plan that the enemy runs every single generation. It's the same plays over and over and over again to undermine the faith of the next generation. The way that I would put it is, we might be in new days, but the enemy runs the same plays. New days, same plays. And by looking at this story that's thousands of years old, we'll find out that the enemy's playbook has already been handed to us in the Bible. And if we know what the enemy is going to do, our likelihood of winning increases. Daniel chapter 1 tells us this story. Now, in order to understand what we're going to read, I have to help you understand how the Bible works, especially the Old Testament. Because when we're reading the story of Daniel, which is the story of an empire called Babylon conquering the people of God, this place called Israel, we're not just looking at a historical account. Because Old Testament stories serve two different purposes. One, it's a historical event that has happened. But number two, it serves as allegorical for the spiritual reality that we're in. I'll give you a couple of examples that will help make this make sense. As an example, when you read about Israel in the Old Testament, it's also a symbol and a sign for the people of God in the New Testament. The story of the Exodus is not just a story of people being delivered from slavery, but it's foreshadowing of what Jesus does when he delivers us from the slavery of sin. Even Hosea, which we read this week in our formation journal, which my wife Stacy called a doozy, not only tells the story of a husband and an unfaithful wife, but it also serves as an illustration for God's faithfulness to us, even when we're unfaithful to him. And today we'll see another example in Babylon. Because throughout the scriptures, Babylon is not just an Old Testament empire in history that attacked Israel, but Babylon is used as a metaphor to talk about the kingdom of the enemy and how he works against the people of God. And you might lean in for a moment and just say, I don't know if I even believe that there is an enemy. And I would say, welcome to church. We're glad that you're here. But we believe what Jesus believed. And Jesus believed that there was an enemy. And I might say, if you're not convinced that there's an enemy or somebody out there who's trying to undermine faith in the world and there isn't an evil entity that's working against us, I would just say this. Wouldn't the best ploy of somebody who is like that be to get you to believe that that person doesn't exist? And so even as we look at what we're teaching today, you may not believe in the source of the strategy, but I'm pretty convinced by the end you'll say that it is the strategy. And so when we read Babylon in this Old Testament story, it's not just a historical account, but it's a picture and an image given to us, a clue, if you will, as to how the enemy works in every single generation. Because when you see Babylon, you're seeing the kingdom of the enemy. I'll give you one example so you know I'm not making it up. In Revelation chapter 14 in the New Testament, John has this imagination of what it's going to be like when Jesus returns. And he says this, verse 6 through 8. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And he said in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of the judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of the water. And a second angel followed and said, fallen is, would you say those three words with me? Babylon the Great. One more time. Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. So does Babylon still exist in physical form? The answer is no. It's a dead empire, right? But does Babylon still exist in a spiritual form? The answer is yes, because it's the way that the enemy works in this generation. So, new days, same place. That sounds so good. Say it with me. New days, same place. One more time. New days, same place. So if I know how the enemy's trying to undermine faith in this generation, I'm going to be more likely to win against him. Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house. So the first thing that we need to see at play in this text is that God seemingly delivers Israel to this pagan empire called Babylon. And the question is, why would God allow his people to be overtaken by an evil empire that wants nothing to do with him? Anybody like, that sounds kind of weird, right? The reason is not so much because God made it happen, as much as it is the people of Israel made choices that led to it happening. We're responsible for our choices. And God said, if you follow me, if you trust me, if you do life my way, my hand of blessing will be on you. But if you choose to deny me, run away from me, and be unfaithful to me, my hand of favor will be off of you. And after century after century after century of people denying God, not loving God, and hurting God's people, God allows Babylon to overtake Israel. And Nebuchadnezzar happens to be the most malevolent, evil leader of the era. His goal was to conquer the entire world. But he knew something. He couldn't afford to run his kingdom without people, and he couldn't keep his kingdom strong if people on the edges rebelled. So here's what he knew. The best way to keep Babylon from breakdown was to make everyone Babylonian. He knew that the more dependent you were on Babylon, he could make you a slave without even knowing you were. Nebuchadnezzar didn't need to kill your God if he could get you to forget it. He didn't need to kill your family if he could get you to renounce them. He didn't need you to use soldiers against you if you became one of them. And that's what we get in Daniel. We get Babylon's playbook. So new days, same plays. Here's the first play. You can write it down. If you want to undermine faith in the next generation, fictionalize the faith. Look at verse 2 with me. It says that Nebuchadnezzar carried off some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. See, Nebuchadnezzar didn't need to destroy the memory of Israel's God. All he needed to do was display it in a museum as one of many faiths to be told. He set up the faith of Israel as one of many options instead of the way, the truth, and the life. And that's exactly what's happening in our culture today. People aren't saying, hey, you have to get rid of the Christian faith. They're just saying, hey, isn't the Christian faith like one of many versions or options that you can believe in? And when that happens, the stories that we know to be true, they become fictionalized, which always makes me nervous when I watch a movie about a Christian story that Hollywood gets their hands on. Like you watch the movie Noah as an example. Tons of money spent, right, to make this amazing film, the cinematic masterpiece. But the story isn't really the story of Noah, is it? But it gets filed away in the museum of our culture, and that's what we believe it's about. The Da Vinci Code with Dan Brown. Do you guys remember that? I can tell you this, if you don't read your Bible, you might believe that some of that stuff is true. And what ends up happening is when we can make faith seem like an idea to get good principles from, then nobody believes that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I don't have to destroy Christianity. I just have to make you to believe it's just one of the many versions of options that you can pick to live a good life. And if I do that, and if the enemy's done that, he wins. Because here's what happens. C.A. Carson puts it so well. What one generation believes, the next generation assumes, and the third generation will forget and deny it. Nebuchadnezzar didn't need to destroy Israel and their faith on day one. He just needed to get the people of Israel to see it as an option, because by the third generation, it would be dead and gone. Here's the second play. After you've fictionalized the faith, the second thing is to identify the influencers. Daniel chapter 1, verse 3 and 4 says, Then the king ordered Ashpenaz. It's an important name. It's the kind of name you give a child that you do not love. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar says, give me the cream of the crop of Israel and bring them to me. Why? Because the enemy doesn't need everyone to follow him. He just needs the influencers to follow him, because those who follow them will. Malcolm Gladwell did this incredible work a number of years ago. He wrote a book called The Tipping Point. And he asked the question, how do trends happen? How does culture shift so quickly? And what he found is you don't need everybody to believe an idea. You just need the top 10% of a community to believe it. He wrote this, the law of the few says there are exceptional people out there who are capable of starting epidemics. And all you have to do is find them. Which has put us in the place today where the role of influencer is now a job. Did you know you can make money posting on social media? And that one of the primary things that young people want to be nowadays is not significant, but famous. And I can't blame them, because you could start a YouTube channel and become a millionaire. You could have a TikTok account and become a millionaire. And that sounds like a way better way to get money than to go to school and get a job, right? Some of us are like, oh, I think social media is ridiculous and people shouldn't do it. And part of the reason why you believe that is because you couldn't make money doing it and other people are. I know that hurt a little bit. Influencer. It's a job. And what's crazy is there's 3 kinds of influencers. In her book, Swipe Up for More, Stephanie McNeil points to the fact that the reason why influencer culture is so big is because we used to watch commercials, but now we have Netflix. Like, you ever been in a situation where you had to watch a show with commercials? And you're like, what in the world is this? Are we in the 90s? Like, what is this? Right? We no longer, like, thumb through magazines. Like, any of my sneakerheads, millennials, remember the day when you used to get Eastbay? Anybody remember Eastbay? And you, like, flip through to try to get the best shoe, right? Now you don't do that. You just go to Amazon and order everything, and Amazon tells you what you're going to buy next. And you're like, that sounds like a good idea, right? That's what we do. So without commercials and without marketing companies have decided the best way to get you to hop on a trend is to get beautiful, attractive people to tell you what you should look like, what you should buy, and what you should want. And it works, doesn't it? Because we were scrolling on social media, and we see that house with that beautiful fireplace and backdrop, and we say, I need to build that now. And every husband in America is like, get rid of Instagram. I don't have the time for this, right? It's like we have our Stanley Cup, but then the influencer has the new Stanley Cup, and we're like, I need the new Stanley Cup. So I'm going to pay $85 to put my water in something, right? And it's one thing when influencers are influencing us on trends like, silly dances or making sourdough, which I never did during the pandemic because I'm a real person, right? Like that kind of deal. But it's another thing when young people are scrolling and the algorithm teaches them how to harm themselves. Or when video can be captured of an embarrassing moment and be spread across the school, and not even in the school, but now the whole world can see it, and it shows up on a variety of different websites, and a kid has to live with that. See, I would say this, like pay attention to what the influencers are communicating, because that's what is needed to get the world to believe it, and that is an old play. We might be in new days, but the enemy runs the same plays. Fictionalize the faith. Gather the influencers. And here's the third thing you can write down in your notes. Re-educate them. Re-educate them. Daniel chapter 1, verse 4 says this, that Ashpenaz, under Nebuchadnezzar's direction, was to teach these young, smart, influential people that belonged to Israel the language and the literature of the Babylonians. And that's by design. Because Israel's source text for education was the Old Testament scriptures. And now it was going to be replaced by the literature of the Babylonians. Israel's language connected them to their identity, and now it would be the language of the Babylonians. See, Nebuchadnezzar knew, and our enemy knows, that if they stop reading and getting educated from the place of their ancestors, and if they stop speaking Hebrew at home, they would be a few generations away from their Hebrew Bible becoming unreadable and their culture being dead. And many of us know this, don't we? If we're bilingual speakers, we know that it can be very easy to lose our mother tongue and in many ways lose access and connectivity back to our culture. Now take that and multiply it times 10, and that's what Nebuchadnezzar is trying to do. If I can just get them to be educated differently, if I can just get them to start speaking our language, I don't have to kill the Israelite culture. The Israelite culture will kill itself. And I want to talk to you parents just for a moment. This series is for everybody, but I want to talk to parents just for a moment. Parents, you should pay specific attention to the education that your children are getting. Because if your child starts going to school in kindergarten and graduates by a senior, they will spend over 15,000 hours in some form of instruction. Do you know how many hours, if you go to church 40 times a year, they'll experience Christian instruction in that same window of time. And for some of you, 40 times a year, that's a pipe dream. Do you want to know what that number is? 520 hours. So 15,000 hours of one version of instruction and 520 hours of time in Christian instruction. The Bureau of Labor Statistics just came out and found that parents usually spend about 20 minutes at most, no more than 20 minutes, paying attention to the education of their kids. Which is why our church is investing right now and researching right now in creative options that allow parents to partner with people that share their values to educate our kids. Because education, it matters. And before you sit back and think that what I'm arguing for is that you got to take your kids out of school and run for the hills, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that what you do on the hours when they are with you is way more important and vital than you could imagine. And we want to help equip you and train you and give you language and tools to be able to be the primary voice in the life of your child so that the language and the literature of Babylon is not the language and literature that they grow up believing is the best one. Here's the fourth reality. Fourth play in the playbook, because it's new days, same plays. After you fictionalize the faith, after you've identified the influencers, after you've re-educated them, the next step is to keep them comfortable and dependent. Keep them comfortable and dependent. Verse 5, the king assigned them a daily amount of food. The them here is these Israelite influencers. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. And they were to be trained for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. Here's what Nebuchadnezzar knew. The best way to keep God's people from thinking about home was to get them to fall in love with their current situation and to keep them dependent on the king's table instead of God's provision. See, they were slaves because they were dependent on the king's table, but they were comfortable slaves, so they had no imagination for anything else. In his profound book, The Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis kind of designs this kind of teaching moment in a fictional account where he talks about these two demons. And again, this is not the Bible. This is a fictional story, okay? Where a demon named Screwtape is writing to his nephew Wormwood, who's this new demon, entry level, who's been tasked with leading a human being astray. And here's what he gives his protege and the advice that he gives him. He said, indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one. It's the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. And then he goes on to say, prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, while really it is finding its place in him. And this is exactly counter to the teachings of Scripture, where Hebrews tells us, for this world is not our permanent home, but we are looking forward to a home yet to come. See, I need you to hear this, especially young people. I need you to hear this. The goal of the enemy is not to get you to jump off the ledge and do crazy, stupid things with your life. He doesn't need you to do that. The goal of the enemy is to get you apathetic about your faith, because he's already won if he's done that. The goal of the enemy is not to get you to ruin your life by doing this horrific thing. The goal of the enemy is to take you down a gradual slope where you don't even realize that you're headed to a life apart from God until you wake up and realize, I don't believe this anymore. And parents and adults in the room, that strategy is the enemy's strategy in your life too. Because how many of us are comfortable but still slaves? Comfortable but still in debt. Comfortable but still in a marriage that we really don't enjoy. Comfortable but still coping with hidden addictions. The enemy's goal is not to just ruin your life today. The enemy's goal is to take you on a journey where eventually you ruin your life yourself. So what's the play? New days, same place. Fictionalize the faith. Gather the influencers. Re-educate them. Keep them comfortable and dependent. And lastly, reshape their sense of self. Daniel chapter 1, verse 6 and 7, we find this. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These 4 names are the 4 names of Jewish boys that were recruited and picked by Nebuchadnezzar as influencers. Verse 7 says, the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. Do not miss this, new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Now, the Hebrew boys had these names by intent. The name Daniel, listen to this, means God is my judge. The name Hananiah means gift of the Lord. The name Mishael means who is like our God. The name Azariah, helped by God. All of these boys had names that directly connected them back to their identity being, I belong to God. And what does Babylon want to do? And what does the enemy want to do? Give them new names so that their new identities are a lesser vision of what God's identity in them is. And there are so many identities in this culture that wants to be placed on our kids. And all of them are lesser than the most important. In fact, I feel like I came here today to tell somebody in the room the identity that you've been living in, the name that you're allowing yourself to be defined by, is lesser than the name that God has placed on your life. You are the beloved of God. You are made with a purpose. God has a plan for your life. You are His image. You are valuable beyond value, worthy beyond worthy. You have been gifted and called, and there is a reason why you're here, and He's made no mistake. You are His masterpiece. This is the identity that God has for you. And settling for anything less than that is giving the enemy a room to undermine the plan and the path that God has for your life. Parents, we need to call our kids to a higher level. Grandparents, we need to call our grandkids to a higher level. Uncles and aunts, youth leaders, educators, teachers, young people, you need to call your friends to a higher level. You are more than the thing culture says you are. You are the beloved of God. And that's the game plan. So what if we just stole the enemy's playbook and we could see what he was doing in real time? Maybe we could increase the odds that our kids are not going to fall susceptible to his lies and to his hope and desire to destroy our kids. What's the game plan? Fictionalize the faith. Gather the influencers. Re-educate them. Keep them comfortable and dependent. And then reshape their identities. Here's my question. Does any of what I'm saying today, as we just study what happened thousands of years ago, sound familiar to you when you look at what's happening in our culture now? The answer is yes, because it's new days, same plays. New generation, same game plan. But there's good news. The good news is that Daniel and his friends not only survived, but they thrived in Babylon. We find in Daniel chapter 1, verse 19 to 20, that the king, when Nebuchadnezzar gets Daniel and Azariah and Mishael and Azariah together, says the king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them, look at this and say it with me, 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So the question is how? How did these young men resist temptation? Resist the temptation of comfort and ease? How did they grow in love with God in a culture that hated him? How did they win in Babylon? Because here's what we know. Daniel didn't run from Babylon, he stood fast in it. And Daniel didn't fear Babylon, he found favor in it. And you know why? Because Daniel had a game plan to win in Babylon. And my question for you parents and grandparents in the room, if we were to sit down and have coffee, do you have a plan to help the next generation beat the odds? Do you have a plan you can point to? Here's how we're going to win. Do you have a plan to build resilient faith in your kids? and young adults and young people in the room, do you have a game plan to ensure that you don't lose the thing that you know matters so much to you right now, but you've seen other people fall away from? Do you have a plan? Because when we have a plan to win in Babylon, a plan that God has given us, we'll find that the likelihood that we beat the odds increases massively. But here's what I know to be true, that you won't win without a plan. But when we know the playbook of the enemy, we can create a game plan to overcome his strategy. Daniel and his friends did it thousands of years ago, and we can do it in our day. Because in the end, there is good news for kids these days. Because Babylon is a distant memory that we read about in history books. But the God of Israel is still alive and well today, and billions of people call him Lord and Savior. A few teenagers who refused to compromise, not even a lot, but a few teenagers who refused to compromise became the conduit through which God changed a nation and redeemed a people. And time again, when they were against the odds, with people conspiring against them, in a den full of lions and in a furnace full of fire, Daniel and his friends walked free and untouched because God was with them. And if God was with them in those days, I'm believing that God is going to be with our kids in these days. So with that in mind, would you stand with me today? Today is part one of a two-part conversation where you and I put together the kind of game plan that increases the likelihood that our kids beat the odds. And today what we learned is that there's a playbook that the enemy runs, and it's new days, but the same place. And what if you and I began to realize, that's fictionalizing the faith. Oh, that's influencers trying to change culture. Oh, that's an educational framework with an agenda for my kid. Oh, that's something I have to look at because I'm way more focused on comfort than I am faithfulness. Oh, that's culture calling me to a lesser identity than the greater one that's on my life. When we begin to see the plays, we can take steps to win the game. And I'm believing the next generation is going to win. I'm believing that the next generation is going to carry the story of faith further and stronger and in more significant ways than we could ever have imagined. And it's going to take all of us. So today we learned about the enemy's playbook. And next week, I'm going to show you God's playbook. And here's what I know. In every generation, God remains undefeated. And he's not going to start losing now. Let's pray together.